The 1993 WWF King of the Ring took place on June 13th at the Nutter Center in Dayton, Ohio. A lot of people debate the start of these different eras we talk about here on Rewind Wrestling. This, for many people, seems to be an event that they look at as perhaps the official kickoff of the New Generation era in the WWF. I think you could point to some shows before this where you're starting to see that push, whether it's guys like Bret Hart, Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels, and so forth. But why this is such, I think one that is easy to kind of pinpoint as a potential starting point for this era is the Hulk Hogan effect, which we'll get to here on this show. This is the official WWF King of the Ring 1993 review. We'll do a deep dive into the stories and everything else surrounding this pay-per-view in another audio podcast here on the channel. But for now, let's review the actual show, which starts with Vince McMahon promoting all the first-round matches in the King of the Ring tournament. So these are your quarterfinal matches here on this particular pay-per-view. Say what you want about the man. His enthusiasm was unmatched in terms of feeling these things, and making it seem like they were such a big deal, which you kind of want to promote that. This is not the first ever King of the Ring tournament, as we know, but it is the first presented here as a pay-per-view type concept. Ringside, your announced team, Jim Ross, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and Randy Savage. What a trio that was. As they discuss Yokozuna versus Hulk Hogan and Crush versus Shawn Michaels. Those are two matches in addition to the tournament that will be featured on this card, and we'll get to those. But we're going to start off with the King of the Ring quarterfinals. Razor Ramon versus Bret Hart, and the fans immediately are chanting 1, 2, 3 at Razor. Not long ago, as we know, he lost to the 1, 2, 3 Kid in shocking fashion on Raw. The winner of this match is going to face the winner of Mr. Perfect versus Mr. Hughes. Bobby the Brain Heenan pushing Bret Hart's skills here, and then says, "But I just can't stand him." That's about as much of a compliment I guess you're going to get as a babyface from the Brain. Just the delivery was Bobby Heenan-esque. It was perfect. Bret kind of controls the action here. Razor eventually pokes him in the eye. Razor sends Bret's shoulder first into the ring post, adds more insult to injury with some kicks to the face. We get a running power slam from Razor, which gets a near fall, but you can tell the frustration is growing a little bit. He can't put Bret away here. He goes for a few elbows. Bret moves out of the way, and Bret drops an elbow off the top, but Razor kicks out at 2.5. We got a really great finishing stretch. You can tell the crowd's getting into it. You get Bret going chest first into the turnbuckle. Razor goes for the Razor's Edge, but Bret wiggles out, uses the ropes to flip over into an inside cradle, and the fans are thinking that's it. But no, it gets 2 3/4. Razor kicks out. Fans nearly blew the roof off the place for that stretch. What a great kind of sequence that was. Then Razor attempts a suplex off the top, but Bret is able to counter it into a pin for the win. This was really good stuff. Not a surprise if you're really thinking about it with these two and the talent that they had. This is going to make the recommended matches list, and it's really just a matter of is anything else going to top it? Spoiler alert, there is something else that will top this. But this was a great start, kind of set the tone for the King of the Ring, and it just shows you how good Bret Hart is, and you're going to see that on display more on this pay-per-view. But yeah, this was really, really great, I thought, from these two in particular. All right, highlights from Superstars as we see Mr. Hughes destroying The Undertaker with the urn, which was handed to him by Harvey Whippleman. Then Mr. Hughes hammers Paul Bearer with it, who was already beaten down by someone. I assume it was John Gonzalez or someone else at that point. A lot going on in this segment. But that is going to lead us into our next quarterfinal match here in the King of the Ring, and that is Mr. Hughes with Harvey Whippleman taking on Mr. Perfect in the King of the Ring quarterfinals. A battle of misters here. Heenan using the telestrator here, John Madden style, in his brain scan segment. So that was the thing they were doing at the time. And he gets a few verbal jabs in on Perfect. Hughes wrestling in a full suit will never not be impressive to me. I just don't know how the guy did it. One reason not to do that, though, was on display when Perfect grabs his tie to get out of a chin lock. Then we get an inset interview from Bret Hart, who's in the back, and he's picking Perfect to win. So this match goes back and forth. Perfect gains the momentum. And so when that happens, Hughes decides he's got a great idea. He's going to hit Mr. Perfect with the urn, which makes zero sense because he does it right in front of the referee, who does call for the disqualification. Not exactly the best strategy if you want to advance in the King of the Ring, is to hit your opponent with an urn with the referee watching you do it. So Mr. Hughes is out of there. Mr. Perfect advances via DQ, but yeah, not much more other than that. Mr. Perfect saving his energy for his next match that he will have. Okay, backstage, Yokozuna and Mr. Fuji are taking aim at Hulk Hogan. Fuji says that Hogan cheated Yokozuna out of the title at WrestleMania 9, and that's going to set up our championship match a little bit later. Back to the quarterfinals we go. Bam Bam Bigelow versus Hacksaw Jim Duggan. The fans chant USA, and a reminder that Bigelow is from Asbury Park, New Jersey, which is also located in the United States. Hacksaw tries to pick up Bigelow. That's not his best decision. He does eventually pick up the big man, though, but he falls on him for 2. He finally body slams Bigelow and goes for the 3-point stance, but Bigelow out of the way. Hacksaw runs his head into the turnbuckle, and that does allow Bam Bam Bigelow to hit the flying headbutt for the victory. Another pretty short match here that really was just kind of establishing what Bigelow was going to be in this tournament, and, well, as we're going to see here in just a second, he's not going to need to be much in the next round to advance to the finals, and we'll talk about what that means here in just a minute. But it seemed like probably a pretty obvious choice to have Bigelow advance here over Hacksaw at this point in 1993. All right, on commentary, you can call 1-900-KING for $1.49 for the first minute, 99 cents after that. Terry Taylor's back here running the phones. You got the Steiners, you got Crush, the Smoking Guns. They're all talking to people. Crush tells a woman named Cheryl that he's going to be the new champion, and he's going through a strategy and all this other stuff. So let me know in the comments. Did you call these 1-900 hotlines, whether it was the WWF, WCW back in the day? I don't think I ever did, but I may have at some point. I don't think I called it for the 1993 King of the Ring. I do remember that. Okay, our last quarterfinal match. It is the Narcissist, Lex Luger, versus Tatanka. Heenan using the brain scan again to look at Luger's incredible physique here. Howard Finkel announces before the match that the referees are going to force Luger to wear an elbow pad due to the screws in his arm, and commentary kind of go over all that, with surgery and everything like that. So they really are playing that up to start this match. They're also playing up the fact that Tatanka still is undefeated at this point. So that is the big part of the story here. Luger starts posing, so Tatanka throws the mirror on him, and it's all Tatanka in the early going. And Bigelow is backstage for his inset interview, and his phrase is very simple. He says he wants to get his hands on the Indian. Well then, it was 1993. Luger regains the advantage, but Tatanka rolls him up for a near fall. More back and forth, with Luger wearing down his opponent. JR reveals at that point that we're 11 minutes into this match and that there's a 15-minute time limit. You know how this is going to go. Tatanka runs wild and gets another near fall and then another. Tatanka with a chop off the top, but Luger kicks out yet again. Tatanka back up top, but Luger moves out of the way. Crowd's really into this, and again, it may depend on your mileage for what you thought of these two guys, but the crowd is really into the back and forth of this match. They keep bringing up the time limit on commentary, so we know how this is going to play out. But the crowd in the arena doesn't really have a clue since they aren't updating them. And so Luger hits a backbreaker for 2, and then the bell rings for the 15-minute time limit draw. The fans aren't happy as Fink announces that both men have now been eliminated in the tournament. Luger gets on the mic and he says, "To hell with that. 5 more minutes." The referees are saying absolutely not. And so, even though Luger kind of feels like a babyface here, pushing for the extra minutes to get a winner, he says, "All right, since I don't get my extra 5 minutes, I'm going to remove the arm pad," and he just wallops Tatanka with it. I probably found this more enjoyable than maybe most people would, but I think it was really a lot to do with the crowd reaction. I thought they were great in this match, and they were feeding into the near falls and all this, and I thought these two worked pretty well together. So this was a pleasant surprise. I can't tell you the last time I watched this match up until doing this rewatch now. So watching it with fresh eyes, I thought this was perfectly fine. So, yeah, I didn't mind this at all, except, of course, if you just were not a fan of the time limit draw. But that does mean now, as Mean Gene Okerlund and commentary lets us know, that Bam Bam Bigelow will advance to the finals. So he does not have a semifinal match. Bam Bam is in the finals. He'll take on the winner of Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect. Speaking of which, they are with Gene backstage, and Gene's back here trying to stir the shit a bit between these two as he starts putting words in Bret's mouth. So, they're just kind of starting off with a friendly tone, but Gene's back here saying, well, Bret, but didn't you say this? But didn't you say that? And Perfect's like, wait a second, you said that? And so Scheme Gene, as a certain person on this card would eventually call him, is at it again. And Bret brings up Stu Hart beating Larry the Axe Hennig, and they bicker for a bit before Perfect pulls his hand away for the fake handshake. He psychs him out here, and then Bret walks off. Perfect says he owes Bret for their SummerSlam match, because that was 1991. We'll get to that in our Rewind series. That'll be in our Golden Era Rewind playlist, but that match was excellent. Let's see if they can top it here with this one. It is Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect in the King of the Ring semifinals, the only semifinal match you're going to get on this card. Bret has his hand taped, and Heenan brings up that Razor stomped his hand in the first match, so you've got to appreciate the little details here. As you would expect, this is a technical masterpiece kind of early on, these two just kind of going back and forth, but then it changes a little bit because Perfect turns up the aggression, and the sportsmanship is out the window as he starts kicking Bret's leg. Perfect catapults Bret off the apron into the steel barricade. So now Bret's selling the knee a bit. So you're seeing kind of Perfect being willing to do whatever it takes to try to advance here to the finals. Perfect with a drop kick off the top, but Bret kicks out at 2. Perfect amps up the speed here, but Bret meets him up top for a suplex. Perfect kicks out at 2.5. The crowd kind of bit on that one. Bret turns the tables by going after Perfect's leg, and then Bret locks in the figure 4. Again, the crowd's thinking this may be it, but Perfect somehow manages to get to the ropes. Bret quickly goes right after the leg again. So this is exactly the way it should be going. This is smart storytelling here between these two. Perfect gets back on track. He locks in the sleeper. Bret gets to the ropes, and Perfect is still favoring his legs. We've got these guys playing up their various injuries. Back to the sleeper. Perfect's using the ropes for leverage, so he's kind of adding it, leaning more into those heel tactics because he wants to win this thing. Bret throws Perfect into the corner, and he racks him kind of under the ropes. Commentary, I think, doing a great job here between Heenan and Savage and Jim Ross, bringing up the idea that, hey, Bam Bam Bigelow might back his way into being the first ever winner of the King of the Ring, having to win only one match because we're getting close to the time limit here. So I thought it was important to push that. Really, thinking of, really, Bam Bam's going to win one match and win this King of the Ring? Now, if they'd have done that, that'd have been a decision right there. But Bret goes for the sharpshooter. Perfect goes after the injured hand. Perfect then goes for the perfect plex. Bret reverses and suplexes both of them over the top to the outside. Perfect with an inside cradle, but then Bret counters it for the win. This was fantastic. Honestly, I haven't watched the SummerSlam 1991 match in a while. We will do that soon here as we go through, again, our series on the channel in the Golden Era Rewind series. But this was fantastic, and I do probably remember it well enough to favor the SummerSlam 1991 match a little bit more, but this was good. This was great. I mean, it was great stuff between these two, and I just thought the counters and just having all these different points where the crowd just cannot do anything but stand up and be immersed in kind of the back and forth between these two. This was so enjoyable. Probably not going to surprise you. This was the match of the show. It was just that good, and we'll get to, again, kind of more thoughts on this in a minute once we get to the final, but the chemistry was just undeniable between Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect, and even in 1993, 2 years basically almost after their SummerSlam 1991 showdown, these two still worked a hell of a match here. So Bret Hart advances, and he is going to face Bam Bam Bigelow in the finals. All right, backstage, Scheme Gene is here with Hogan and Jimmy Hart. Hogan's going to retain the title. Jimmy's wearing a Hulk jacket. And that leads us into our championship match. Yokozuna with Mr. Fuji versus the champion Hulk Hogan with Jimmy Hart for the WWF title. And right away, something a little off here because you've got photographers following Yokozuna down the aisle, and JR brings up the story about how they're documenting his journey, and potentially winning the championship, wanting to be part of history here with Yokozuna. So you've got a lot of photographers here. Keep that in mind. Savage says that some people feel that Bret should have received the rematch against Hogan, and I'd say that's accurate because that was part of the story here, is that, Bret was able to get into the King of the Ring without having to qualify because it was almost like, well, he should have gotten his shot, but in real life, that was not to be, and we will get into more of that as we do our King of the Ring 1993 deep dive, which will be a bit of a longer form show where we look at some news nuggets and all that surrounding this show rather than just the review, but let's just say that Hulk Hogan had a little bit to do with that not happening. Yokozuna uses power early on, but Hogan fights back, starts biting Yokozuna in the corner. Hogan tries to pick up Yokozuna, but that's not happening. Kind of a similar spot to Hogan trying to pick up Andre at the start of WrestleMania 3. Yokozuna works in the bear hug, and it's great seeing the Hogan superfan. There he is, Roddy Hogan, in the front row. He passed away not long before Hogan. I think it was several days apart there in July of 2025. But great to see him. He always brought just a tremendous energy anytime you saw him at these shows. The fans rally behind Hogan as he punches out of it. But Yokozuna hits him with an elbow to the face. Yokozuna with a belly-to-belly suplex, but Hogan kicks out. It's Hulk up time, brother, from there. Because Hogan hits the big boot, then another, but Yokozuna won't go down. Finally, after the third big boot, down goes Yokozuna. Hogan with the leg drop, but Yoko kicks out at 2, and the commentary has lost it. They're wait a second. Yoko just kicked out of the leg drop after 3 big boots. Hogan knocks Mr. Fuji off the apron, and one of the cameramen decides to get a better shot here as Hogan is just kind of on a roll. Well, then we get the infamous spot where the cameraman has his camera, Hogan walks over, and he just snaps the photo, and instead it's a fireball right to the face of Hulk Hogan here. Yokozuna drops the leg on Hogan for the 1, 2, 3 to win the WWF Championship. After the match, Yokozuna hits the bonsai drop on Hogan for good measure. Heenan declares that Hulkamania is finished. The crowd was into this and expected Hogan to do his thing to find a way to win, but that didn't happen. And there is a new WWF champion in Yokozuna. Not a great match, just overall. But again, this is where the crowd can make everything. They were very into this, the back and forth, but it was just so visible, even at the time. Like the crowd reaction for Hogan just was not what it was, right? The years before, and we all knew that. And getting the title back on Yokozuna here. And these two would still, have some things going on beyond this, but as we know, and I mentioned earlier why maybe people are going to look at this maybe as the start of the new generation era. This was the last pay-per-view for Hulk Hogan in the WWF until he eventually returned in 2002. So this was the changing of the guard, if you want to call it that, to where you don't have Hulk Hogan kind of on top or in these top spots on WWF pay-per-view the way you have going all the way back to WrestleMania 1 in 1985. And so for this next 9-year stretch or so, there's no Hogan in these spots. And so that's why I think, again, you want to maybe pick this as the start of the new generation era. I could completely agree with that because of that aspect, the Hulk Hogan effect. And we will, again, get into a lot of the perhaps politics behind the scenes as to why we didn't get the Hogan-Bret match and all that stuff eventually. But for now, Yokozuna is the new champion, and this is Hulk Hogan's final pay-per-view match here for many years in the WWF. All right, Gene is with Shawn Michaels backstage and a rather large man who still does not have a name. Michaels just runs down Hogan here. I mean, he's just taking all kinds of shots at Hulk Hogan. But Gene wants to the focus to be on the name of the man standing behind Shawn Michaels. And so Michaels reveals that this man is his insurance policy, and he does reveal him as Diesel. So, new generation, indeed, as we start off knowing what these two are going to mean to the WWF over the next several years. All right, we get this 8-man tag between the Steiner brothers and the Smoking Guns. They're going to take on Money Inc. and the Headshrinkers. Again, this is an 8-man tag team match, kind of thrown together here, but it was something where, as you see this match play out, you just wanted to get everybody to get some stuff in, and Money Inc. are the champions, so everyone's aiming for them at this point. Savage notes that they could not stay on the same page with the Headshrinkers on Raw, so they're kind of playing that up a little bit going into this match too. It really is, I mean, there's not a lot to recap here other than the fact that every team is just kind of having an opportunity to get their stuff in a little bit. It's a pretty action-packed sprint, but beyond that, I mean, the finish, DiBiase puts the $1 Million Dream on Billy Gunn, but DiBiase, instead of holding it in to win the match, decides he wants to taunt a bit before finishing the job, so we know what happens from there. Billy Gunn reverses it into a small package for the victory, so a little bit of an upset win here for the Smoking Guns. Not much to it. I really don't have a lot more to add. It was just really a thrown-together match to get all these teams on the card and to push that you had a pretty competitive tag team division with everybody kind of gunning, I guess pun intended, for Money Inc. At this point in the WWF. So, all right, Terry Taylor is about fed up with this hotline. I can tell. I can just tell by the mannerisms. Terry Taylor's had enough of this 1-900-KING hotline. There's a kid or guy named Josh asking Razor about the 1-2-3 kid, and it has something to do with the money, but the only thing you kind of hear as they cut away is Razor saying something about how that kind of money would, even allow Mr. Perfect's mother to dance naked on a table. A lot going on there in that segment. Not a lot of context, but had something to do with the money and the 1-2-3 kid. So, yeah, there was that. Meanwhile, backstage, Jack Tunney congratulates Yokozuna. So, Tunney's got nothing more to add here other than congratulating Yokozuna when it was very clear that someone threw a fireball at Hulk Hogan's eyes. So, Jack Tunney, who has banned reptiles and other things from ringside, may have to ban the photographers after this one. Fuji just taunting here, saying he told Mean Gene that Yokozuna would win. They're going to celebrate in America. They're not leaving. So, there's that. All right. Your match before the main event, Crush versus Shawn Michaels with Diesel for the Intercontinental title. JR updates us on Hogan, saying his vision is going to be fine, and Savage says that Hogan will be back for Yokozuna, which, again, would not necessarily be true on television, but it would at least continue for a little bit. Crush with a shoulder tackle that sends Michaels to the outside. A few drop kicks sends Michaels out again. Crush just kind of showcasing his strength here. Savage argues that maybe Crush could slam Yokozuna. Perhaps. Diesel helps Michaels retreat for a much-needed break, but then Crush kind of goes after Michaels again. Diesel in the way. So they're playing this up like Diesel is, in fact, playing up the insurance policy here for Shawn Michaels. Michaels sneaks in, hits Crush from behind, and then Michaels bounces Crush's head off the post. Into the finish here with Crush having the momentum, and he swats Michaels off the top and hits a backbreaker for 2, but here comes Doink. And there are 2 Doinks, and they're smoking cigars. They come out, they're taunting Crush. That distracts him enough to where Michaels hits the kick to Crush into the corner, and then Michaels pins him to retain the title. This was fine. I mean, like I said, it really to serve nothing more than to tell a couple different stories. That is just Diesel being the guy that's going to have Shawn Michaels back at this point, and to kind of push more stuff between Doink and Crush. So, not much more to it than that. All right, backstage, Mean Gene is with Bam Bam Bigelow, and he has proclaimed that he is going to be the first King of the Ring here. All right, a lot of notes on this match because I think this is one that, again, is pretty fascinating, all things considered. It's really a reminder of how good both of these guys were in the ring. Really your basic babyface versus heel setup. And I go back to the commentary team here of Jim Ross, Randy Savage, and Bobby Heenan. Like, they really did a good job putting over, just as I said earlier, like talking about the possibility of Bigelow being the first King of the Ring without winning a match outside of the first one. without needing a quarterfinal or, a semifinal or final win. Like, that could have happened if you had Bret and Perfect going to the time limit draw. But they really put over the difference in the paths to the finals for both. So you're putting Bret Hart at a disadvantage. That really works well. He had taxing matches against top stars in Razor Ramon and Mr. Perfect. Meanwhile, Bigelow, had to have 5 minutes against Hacksaw Jim Duggan. And he had an hour and 20 minutes rest compared to Bret Hart's 40 minutes rest after having 2 grueling matches. So Heenan was telling everyone to bet on Bigelow, because why wouldn't he at this point, given those odds, right? Bret's limping down the aisle to further the push for him as the ultimate underdog here, just a master at selling. And they were really excellent, I thought, too. Quickly established like Bigelow as the dominant, powerful heel whose goal was to really just go in and decimate Bret's entire body. And it's not just, his whole body. It's a body that is fatigued at this point. And so you have JR and Savage really selling it like pros, pointing out Bigelow's focus here and Bret's determination to not quit. And also, like, I bring this up like as a sidebar. Bigelow's headbutts were awesome. Whether he was standing, jumping, diving, he made all of them look fantastic. He was just so good for his size. I know a lot of people say that, but this is the kind of match where you really see it on display. The real focus, though, in this match for Bigelow is Bret's back, which took an absolute beating throughout this match. Whether it's bear hugs, backbreakers, everything in between. Bigelow's kind of cerebral approach here is on full display. You've got Mean Gene watching studiously from the stage. That adds a little bit of that visual touch, too, where Mean Gene's just watching here, getting ready for the ceremony to crown the winner and all this other stuff. But eventually, as you knew, the resilient underdog would do, Bret is able to battle back. He turns the tide by throwing Bigelow into the steel railing on the outside, only to have Bigelow counter a flying attempt off the apron to ram Bret's already decimated back into the steel post, so you add a little bit more there. Then we've got some shenanigans. Luna Vachon comes out to add some insult to injury here as she hits Bret in the back with the chair, while Bigelow distracts the referee. Bigelow then hits the diving headbutt for the win. But wait, here comes Earl Hebner to say that he saw everything. In all caps. He saw everything. So Joey Marella says the match must continue. So we've got some controversy here. I'm never a huge fan of the match restarts since interference plays into matches all the time, throughout history, it seems. But I get why they did it here, because it does add that extra, all right, the fans go all the way down, and now the emotions are at a high, and it's buzzing, right? Because now, okay, Bret's got a chance again. Woo, exhale. So you know how things would play out from here. For Bigelow, several great near falls. Bigelow tries one last time to snap Bret's back in half, but Bret just will not give up. The desperation attempts from Bret eventually pay off as, again, despite several more counters from Bigelow, Bret hops on Bigelow's shoulders and uses the victory roll for the win at 18 minutes and 11 seconds. I mean, this is another one where I'm just like, if you watch these two in action and the chemistry together, they were great. I'd still put Bret versus Perfect ahead of this, but this was probably number 2. Like, if you had to rank them, I'd do Bret Perfect, Bret Bam Bam, and then Bret Razor. All of them are worth watching, and we'll get to that in a second. And so that's how you finish this thing off. It gives the fans what they want. Bret is the first King of the Ring here in this particular setting, the way they're playing it up. And so, by the way, too, another note here, JR was kind of pushing the possibility of the pay-per-view going off the air before the conclusion of the match. So maybe they're a little worried about getting everything in here, but you still had to get to the crowning ceremony where Bret is, getting all of he's getting the crown and Mean Gene's there with him and all this, and then you get the big angle at the end where Jerry Lawler comes in. He proclaims himself to be the true king of the WWF before he starts assaulting Bret Hart with a variety of medieval objects here. And that is kind of the big theme going off. But, of course, these two would get into a feud that wouldn't just be a short-term thing. It would last for a while, years for Bret Hart and Jerry the King Lawler. So you have the King come in, go at the new King and Bret Hart. It made all the sense in the world to do it that way. But, yeah, pretty impressive beatdown here from Jerry Lawler on Bret Hart to cap off the pay-per-view. And like I said, really, the restart finish aside, this was just a very well-told match. Every move kind of meant something. It had intention, and it played into the bigger story of Bret just being exhausted and having to overcome the odds. And really, 3 tremendous opponents when you think about it, in Razor, Perfect, and Bam Bam, in one single night to earn the crown. And yeah, I think I looked at Cage Match. These 3 between Bret and Bam Bam, they only had 3 singles matches together in their entire career. So pretty impressive chemistry knowing that. All right, so that was the 1993 King of the Ring. Recommended matches, every single Bret Hart match I would put on there. I would put the Razor one, the Perfect one, the Bam Bam one. If you only have time to watch one, it would be the Perfect one. But the Bam Bam one, I would not throw out. I mean, that'd be a pretty close one. Like, I would still, I think, just for the way they pulled it off, very, very impressed by that one. So I'd put all those on there. And to be honest with you, I would probably even throw the Tatanka Lex Luger one on there. It's a 15-minute draw. Not a lot of rewatchability probably for most people, but I thought the crowd made that one better. But it's still further away from the other 3 Bret matches. MVP of the show, surprise, surprise, I'm going to give it to Bret Hart because I think he was the MVP of the King of the Ring in 1993. But overall thoughts, is this a show worth watching? I'd say yes, it was, because I think you have, like I mentioned, if you want to declare that this is the start of the new generation era, this is such a vast difference between what you saw from Bret Hart in his 3 matches on this show and what you saw in the one match that Hulk Hogan had against Yokozuna. There was a clear divide as to what the WWF had been and how that Hogan-Yokozuna match played into that versus the direction the WWF was going. And that's what Bret Hart was when you looked at all the matches he had and the stories that were being told in those matches. So completely different. And so I think this is a fascinating watch because I just think for that reason, knowing what we know now, there's a lot of stuff on here that really is kind of stand out. And two, even the commentary trio. Again, you're not going to get many shows if you go back and rewatch a lot of stuff with Jim Ross, Randy Savage, and Bobby Heenan. And so I just thought those 3 worked really well together. And so I found this to be a pretty enjoyable show. So I would recommend this as one worth watching if you're looking for a quick, watch, stroll down memory lane, 2 hours, 45 minutes, something like that. I would recommend this show. I think it's pretty entertaining, to say the least. There you go. There are my thoughts on the King of the Ring 1993. What do you guys think about it? When's the last time you watched it? If you watched it recently, what did you think about Bret Hart and his 3 matches? Hulk Hogan's final, kind of charade here, and before he left the WWF for nearly a decade. Let me know your thoughts. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. Check out all of our other series here. This is part of our New Generation Rewind series. We also have our Golden Era, our Attitude Era, and Ruthless Aggression Era Rewind series on the channel as part of this audio podcast feed. So appreciate you guys watching and or listening, and let me know your thoughts on the 1993 WWF King of the Ring.